Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The headlights cut through the darkness at 2:47 a.m. when Matthew Cameron heard the knock. As a family therapist specializing in high-conflict divorces, he trained himself to function on minimal sleep, but something about the urgent rhythm of knuckles on would send ice through his veins. His wife Kelly hadn't come to bed yet. She claimed she was working late on a project in her home office. Two officers stood on his porch, their expressions carefully neutral. Between them stood Owen, his 6-year-old son, barefoot and shivering in pajamas despite the October chill. Dirt streaked his small face, and his eyes held a hollow quality that Matthew had seen before, but only in his most traumatized clients. "Mr. Cameron? I'm Officer Donnie Hancock. We found your son walking on Highway 87, about 3 miles from here. He was heading away from town." Matthew's training kicked in even as his heart hammered. He knelt, opening his arms, but Owen didn't run to him. The boy stood rigid, clutching something in his fist. "Owen, buddy, what happened? You're supposed to be at Grandma Patricia's." Matthew had dropped him off himself at 6 p.m., kissing his forehead before heading to his evening session with a client. Kelly had texted him that she'd pick Owen up around 9. "Dad," Owen's voice came out scratchy, raw from crying. "I tried to come home." The second officer, younger with a nameplate reading Contreras, spoke up. "He gave us this, so we had to give it to you, nobody else." Owen's small hand uncurled, revealing a crumpled piece of paper. Matthew took it with trembling fingers, his therapist's eye immediately noting the careful way Owen watched him, as if gauging whether he'd be believed. The note was in Owen's careful first-grade printing. "Mom said Grandma would keep me. She said Dad don't want me either. Grandma locked me in the darkroom. I got scared. I ran away. I want Dad." The world tilted. Matthew read it again, each misspelled word a knife. Officer Hancock's expression had shifted from neutral to something harder. "Mr. Cameron, I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what was supposed to happen tonight. And then I think we need to talk to your wife." Matthew's mind raced, falling into the analytical mode that served him in his practice. Owen was staying overnight at my mother-in-law Patricia James's house. It was planned for weeks. My wife Kelly was supposed to pick him up by 9 p.m. She texted me that she did. "What time was that text?" 8:47 p.m. Matthew pulled out his phone, showing the message. "Got him. He's fine. Going to bed. See you tomorrow." Officer Contreras exchanged a glance with his partner. "Sir, we found your son at 2:15 a.m. He'd been walking for at least an hour, maybe more, based on how far he'd gotten. His feet are badly cut up." Matthew pulled Owen into his arms, feeling the child's heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. "Let me call my wife." The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A text, "Call me now. Owen is here. Police are here." 3 minutes passed in awful silence before his phone buzzed. "Not Kelly, Patricia. Whatever lies that boy told, I won't be blamed for his wild imagination." Patricia's voice dripped with disdain before Matthew could speak. "He's been acting out for attention. Kelly and I discussed it. Perhaps if you spent less time analyzing other people's children and more time disciplining your own." He walked 3 miles on a highway in the middle of the night. Matthew cut her off, his voice deadly calm. "Barefoot. The police found him." A pause. Then, incredibly, Patricia laughed. It was a short, brittle sound. "Well, he ran away from my house around 10 p.m. Threw a tantrum when I told him his mother wasn't coming. Not my problem if he decided to go on an adventure. Children these days are so dramatic." "You didn't call the police?" "You didn't call us." "I called Kelly. She said to let him tire himself out. He'd come back." Her voice hardened. "I'm 73 years old, Matthew. I'm not chasing after a spoiled child in the dark." Kelly assured me it was handled. Officer Hancock gestured for the phone. Matthew handed it over, watching the officer's jaw tighten as he identified himself and began asking questions. The conversation lasted 2 minutes before Hancock ended the call and turned to his partner. "Mrs. James admits the child left her premises approximately 4 hours ago, and she failed to report him missing. She claims she contacted the mother." He looked at Matthew. "Where is your wife?" "I'll show you." Matthew carried Owen inside. The boy had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted, and laid him on the living room couch, tucking a blanket around him. Then he led the officers through the house to Kelly's home office. The door was locked. Matthew knocked, waited, knocked harder. "Kelly, open up. The police need to talk to you." Silence. He used his key. The office was empty, but the computer was on, the screensaver dancing. Her purse sat on the desk, her keys beside it. The window was open, curtains billowing in the cold breeze. "Her car?" Officer Contreras asked. "In the garage." Matthew's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "I would have heard if she'd left. The garage door is loud." Officer Hancock spoke into his radio, calling for additional units to search the property. Matthew stood in the doorway of his wife's office, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. When had he last been invited in here? She'd claimed she needed privacy for her consulting work, and he'd respected that boundary. Now he noticed the second phone charger. The expensive bottle of whiskey. Kelly didn't drink whiskey. Men's cologne hanging faintly in the air, mixing with her perfume. "Mr. Cameron," Officer Contreras said gently, "is there somewhere you can stay tonight? We're going to need to investigate this thoroughly. Your son is going to need to be examined at the hospital, those cuts on his feet, and we need to make sure." "I understand." Matthew did understand. They needed to rule out whether Owen had been harmed beyond neglect. The protocol was clear. He testified as an expert witness in cases like this. He just never imagined he'd be living one. The search found Kelly 40 minutes later in a neighbor's detached garage 2 houses down. She'd been hiding in Lawrence Cannon's workshop, and she wasn't alone. Lawrence, a divorced real estate developer who'd moved in 6 months ago, stood with his arm around Kelly when the officers opened the door. Both were fully dressed, but the sleeping bag spread on the floor and the wine glasses told their story. Matthew watched from his front porch as they were escorted back. Kelly's eyes met his for one brief moment, and instead of shame or remorse, he saw calculation. She was already crafting her narrative, he could tell. 17 years of marriage had taught him to read her expressions. "Matthew, this isn't what it looks like," she started as Officer Hancock guided her toward the house. "Your son walked 3 miles on a highway because your mother locked him in a room and you told her not to worry when he ran away," Matthew said quietly. "What exactly should it look like?" "He's being dramatic. You know how he is. He's 6 years old. His feet are shredded. He has splinters and cuts up his legs. He was terrified enough to walk on a highway in the dark." Matthew's voice never rose, but something in his tone made Kelly step back. "Officer Hancock, what happens now?" The next hours blurred together. Owen was taken to the hospital. Matthew went with him while Kelly was questioned. Child Protective Services was called. A social worker named Clara Wells arrived at 6 a.m., her kind eyes taking in every detail. Matthew answered her questions with the same clinical precision he used in his own assessments. Yes, his marriage had been troubled. No, he'd never suspected abuse. Yes, Kelly had become distant over the past 6 months. No, Owen had never shown fear of his mother before, but he'd been reluctant to go to Grandma Patricia's lately. "I thought he was just being difficult about bedtime rules," Matthew admitted, and the failure tasted like ash. "Patricia is strict. She's old-fashioned. I thought." He looked at Owen, sleeping now with his bandaged feet elevated and 4 drip keeping him hydrated. "I'm a therapist. I counsel families in crisis. How did I miss this?" Clara Wells touched his shoulder. "Mr. Cameron, in my experience, it's hardest to see what's happening in your own home. The question is, what do you do now?" Matthew looked at his son, at the bruises the hospital staff had found on Owen's upper arms, finger-shaped marks where Patricia had grabbed him. At the psychological evaluation notes documenting a child showing signs of severe anxiety and possible trauma. At the police report that would document Kelly's failure to retrieve her child, her false text, her hiding with her lover while Owen walked barefoot on a highway. Something cold and clear settled in Matthew's chest. He was a family therapist who specialized in high-conflict divorces and parental alienation. He knew every legal avenue, every psychological evaluation standard, every way the system worked and failed. And he knew exactly how to use that knowledge. Now, Matthew met Clara's eyes. "Now I protect my son, whatever it takes." The morning after brought a cascade of revelations that Matthew documented with meticulous care. His training had taught him that the truth emerged not in dramatic confessions, but in small inconsistencies, in what people revealed when they thought no one was watching. Kelly sat across from him at their dining room table, a CPS representative and a police detective present. Owen was upstairs with a trauma counselor. The house felt like a crime scene, which Matthew supposed it was. "I want a lawyer," were Kelly's first words. "You're not under arrest," Detective Rudy Huffman said. "But we do need to understand what happened last night." Matthew watched his wife transform. Gone was the calculation from hours earlier. Now she was the victim, tears welling perfectly. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But Matthew, you have to understand, I've been so stressed. Your hours are insane. You're never home. I felt abandoned. Lawrence he was there for me. You told your mother not to call the police when Owen ran away." Matthew's voice remained steady, clinical. He was documenting her responses, filing them away. "You sent me a text claiming you'd picked him up safely." "What?" Kelly's mask slipped for just a moment. "Mom overreacted. Owen throws tantrums. I thought he'd hide in her yard for a while and come back. How was I supposed to know he'd walk onto a highway? He's 6. It was dark. He was barefoot." Each word was measured. "You chose to stay with Lawrence instead of checking on our son. I made a mistake." Kelly's voice rose. "God, Matthew, you're acting like I'm some kind of monster. He's fine. Kids are resilient. You're always saying that to your clients, aren't you? Maybe you should take your own advice instead of being so dramatic." Detective Huffman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Cameron, we found text messages between you and your mother. Would you like to explain them?" The detective placed printed screenshots on the table. Matthew had expected the affair would be documented. People were rarely as careful as they thought, but what he read made his blood run cold. The text dated back 3 months. "Patricia to Kelly, you need to establish a pattern. Make him look unstable. Document everything. My lawyer says the courts favor mothers, but you need evidence." Kelly to Patricia, Matthew's too observant. "I need to be careful." Patricia to Kelly, use the boy. He's young enough to mold. Start limiting Matthew's time with him. Make it seem like Owen prefers you. The most damning one was from 2 weeks ago. Kelly to Patricia, Owen keeps asking why Dad doesn't come to school events anymore. I told him Dad doesn't care. He cried. Good. Lawrence says once the divorce goes through, he'll adopt Owen. We just need Matthew to look like an unfit father. Patricia to Kelly, bring him to my house more often. I'll help reinforce the narrative. The child needs to understand his father is unreliable. Matthew read them twice, his therapist training keeping his expression neutral, even his rage built behind his sternum. The CPS representative, Clara Wells, had gone pale. Mrs. Cameron, Clara said quietly, you engaged in parental alienation. This is documented psychological abuse. I was venting. Kelly's tears dried instantly, replaced by fury. You can't use private text against me. I have a right to talk to my mother. You coordinated a campaign to damage your son's relationship with his father, Detective Huffman said. And last night, when you knew he was missing, you chose not to act. That's child endangerment at minimum. Matthew finally spoke. Why? Kelly's eyes snapped to his. Why what? Why not just ask for a divorce? Why this elaborate plan? I would have agreed to shared custody. I would have been fair. For a moment, genuine emotion crossed Kelly's face. Contempt. Fair? You think I want fair? Lawrence has money, Matthew. Real money. You want a family, not someone else's damaged kid. He said once we're married, we can start fresh. New babies. Owen was in the way. The room went silent. Even Kelly seemed to realize what she'd said. Did you just admit, Clara Wells said slowly, that your plan was to remove your son from your life so you could start a new family? Kelly's lawyer, when had she called a lawyer, burst through the door at that moment. My client is done answering questions. But the damage was done. Matthew had heard what he needed to hear. Over the next 3 days, Matthew moved with purpose. He'd taken emergency leave from his practice, telling his supervisor the truth. His colleagues rallied around him, offering support and coverage. Owen stayed home from school, working with the trauma counselor and slowly beginning to talk about what had happened. Grandma Patricia said you didn't want me anymore. Owen whispered on the second night, curled in Matthew's lap. She said Mom found a better family, that I was too much trouble. Matthew held his son, feeling each word like a physical blow. Owen, I want you more than anything in the world. You're not trouble. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. But Mom said, Mom was wrong, and Grandma Patricia was wrong, and I'm going to make sure they can never hurt you again. Owen pulled back to look at his father's face. Promise, promise. What Matthew didn't tell his son was the depth of the plan he was formulating. Years of working in family court had taught him that evidence mattered, that documentation was everything, and that the system, when properly leveraged, could be a powerful weapon. He started by requesting all of Owen's school records. The teacher, Johanna Tuttle, had documented multiple incidents where Owen had become anxious on grandma days. There were notes about Owen crying before pickup, about his reluctance to leave, about artwork showing dark rooms and locked doors. I tried to reach out to Mrs. Cameron, Johanna told Matthew, during an emergency meeting. She said Owen was just being clingy, that you were too soft on him and I should ignore it. But Mr. Cameron, I've been teaching for 15 years. That wasn't clinginess. That was fear. Matthew recorded everything. The pediatrician's notes from a visit 3 months prior where Owen had bruises Patricia had dismissed as boys being boys. The neighbor who'd heard Patricia screaming at Owen through open windows. The other grandmother, Matthew's mother, Irma Cameron, who tearfully admitted Patricia had told her she wasn't needed, that she was undermining Kelly's parenting. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall Matthew was building. But he needed more. He needed Patricia and Kelly to show their true nature where it couldn't be denied. He found his opportunity through Lawrence Cannon. Matthew had done his research. Lawrence was wealthy, charming, and had a history of 3 previous divorces. What was more interesting was what Matthew found when he ran a deeper background check, something he was entitled to do as a concerned parent investigating who might be around his child. Lawrence Cannon had financial irregularities, nothing prosecuted, but complaints from previous business partners, allegations of fraud that were settled out of court, and most damningly, a restraining order from his second wife claiming he'd been emotionally abusive to her teenage daughter. Matthew made copies of everything and sent them to his lawyer, Arnold Holt, one of the best family attorneys in the state. This is good, Arnold said, spreading the documents across his desk. But it's not enough to guarantee you full custody. Kelly will claim she made a mistake, that she's learned her lesson. Patricia will say Owen was never in real danger. We need them to show the court who they really are. I know, Matthew said, and I have an idea. The idea came from his professional expertise. In high-conflict divorces, the truth often emerged during custody evaluations, comprehensive psychological assessments conducted by neutral third parties. Matthew couldn't conduct Owen's evaluation himself, but he could request one. And he knew who he could request. Dr. Jeffrey Reed, a colleague known for his thoroughness and his zero tolerance for parental alienation. But Matthew's plan went deeper than that. He needed Kelly and Patricia to believe they were winning. He needed them overconfident, careless. So he gave them what they wanted. At the first emergency custody hearing, Matthew's lawyer argued for temporary full custody. The judge, reviewing the evidence of Owen walking on the highway and Kelly's text messages, granted it, but with supervised visitation for Kelly. Matthew watched his wife's face as the ruling came down. Instead of fear or remorse, he saw fury. She believed she was the victim here, that the system was being unfair. Patricia, sitting behind her, wore the same expression. Perfect, because Matthew knew something about people who believed they were rightfully wronged. They would fight back, and in fighting, they would reveal themselves. Over the next 2 weeks, Kelly and Patricia's true nature emerged like a slow-developing photograph. They violated the supervised visitation rules, with Patricia showing up at Owen's school claiming she had a right to see her grandson. They bombarded Matthew with texts and calls, demanding he stop being vindictive. They hired a PR consultant and began crafting a narrative on social media about a father who was keeping a loving mother from her child. Matthew documented everything and said nothing publicly. His silence infuriated them more. Then Lawrence Cannon made a mistake. He approached Matthew outside his office one evening, all false sympathy and reasonable tone. Look, man, I get it. Kelly made mistakes. But this has gone too far. Owen needs his mother. You're hurting him to punish her. Matthew studied the man who'd been sleeping with his wife while Owen was locked in a dark room. You think I'm doing this for punishment? What else would you call it? Come on, be rational. Kelly's a good mother. One mistake doesn't define her. And the stuff with Patricia, old people are from a different generation. You can't hold her to modern standards. Owen has nightmares every night, Matthew said quietly. He wakes up screaming that he's lost, that no one wants him. He flinches when I say we're visiting any relative. That's what one mistake looks like. Lawrence's reasonable mask slipped. Kids are dramatic. He'll get over it. But if you keep pushing this, you're going to destroy Kelly's reputation, her career. Is that really what you want? To be that guy who ruins his ex-wife's life? I want my son safe. If Kelly's reputation suffers because she endangered our child, that's not me ruining anything. That's consequences. Lawrence's eyes hardened. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so perfect? You were never there. You buried yourself in your work, analyzing other people's families while yours fell apart. Kelly needed someone, and I was there. Owen will adjust. Kids always do. But you're going to end up alone, holding on to this grudge while Kelly and I build a real family. Is that a threat? It's reality. Drop this custody fight. Accept shared custody, be reasonable, or I promise you, we'll make your life hell. Patricia has connections. Kelly knows people. You'll lose your practice, your reputation. We'll paint you as the unstable one. Matthew let the silence stretch, watching Lawrence's confidence build. Then he smiled slightly. Thank you for clarifying your position. Lawrence frowned. What? I record all my conversations, Mr. Cannon. It's a habit from my professional work. Clients sometimes make claims they deny later. I've found documentation invaluable. Matthew pulled out his phone, showing the recording app actively capturing their conversation. You just admitted to coercion and made a threat to destroy my career if I pursue custody of my endangered son. That's going to look interesting to the judge. Lawrence's face went white, then red. You son of a... I'd recommend you leave now and tell Kelly that her strategy of intimidation isn't going to work. Lawrence stormed off, and Matthew added the recording to his growing file. The custody evaluation began 3 weeks after the highway incident. Dr. Jeffrey Reed spent hours with Owen, with Matthew, and separately with Kelly and Patricia. Matthew trusted Jeffrey's professionalism, but he also knew his colleague well enough to predict his approach. Jeffrey specialized in spotting parental alienation and coached responses. He developed techniques to get past the masks people wore in evaluations. Matthew had seen him work, had consulted with him on difficult cases. Now Jeffrey was working on Matthew's case, and Matthew felt strange watching from the other side. The evaluation report came back after 2 weeks. Matthew sat in Arnold Holt's office as his lawyer read through it, watching Arnold's expression grow increasingly grave. This is damning, Arnold finally said. Jeffrey doesn't hold back. The report detailed Owen's severe anxiety, his trauma responses, his persistent belief that his father was going to abandon him, a belief that had been carefully cultivated through months of manipulation. It documented the ways Kelly had failed to bond with Owen during supervised visits, how she'd spent most of the time on her phone or complaining about Matthew. But the most devastating sections covered Patricia and Kelly's joint evaluation. Jeffrey had interviewed them together, and they'd revealed their true philosophy. Children need strict discipline. Owen was overindulged by his father. When I locked him in the guest room for misbehavior, it was a time-tested method of correction. My generation understood that children need firm boundaries. I didn't think it was a big deal that he walked on the highway. He knew his way home. It was only 3 miles. Children used to walk much farther. This generation coddles them. Owen would benefit from less time with his father. Matthew's therapeutic approach has made the boy soft, overly emotional. He needs masculine guidance, which Lawrence can provide. Jeffrey's clinical analysis concluded with a recommendation that Kelly receive limited supervised visitation, that Patricia have no unsupervised contact with Owen, and that Matthew receive full physical and legal custody pending Kelly's completion of parenting classes and therapy. The judge will accept this, Arnold said. But we still have the hearing. Kelly's lawyer will fight it. Let them fight, Matthew said. I have one more move to make. The move came 2 days before the custody hearing. Matthew had been monitoring Kelly's social media through a mutual friend who'd remained neutral. Kelly had been ranting about the biased evaluation, claiming Jeffrey Reed had been Matthew's friend and couldn't be trusted. She'd also been planning something. Posts in a private group Matthew's friend had accessed showed Kelly discussing how to fix the situation. Patricia had hired a new lawyer, one known for aggressive tactics in custody cases. They were going to argue that Matthew had coached Owen, that he'd manufactured the evidence, that the entire highway incident had been exaggerated. Lawrence had found witnesses, Patricia's friends, willing to testify that Owen had been perfectly fine at Patricia's house, that he was prone to dramatics, that Matthew had always been controlling. It was a comprehensive counterattack, and Matthew had to admit it was well planned. If the evaluation hadn't been so thorough, if the evidence wasn't so documented, it might have worked. But Kelly and Patricia made one critical mistake. They underestimated Matthew's network. As a respected family therapist, Matthew had worked with dozens of professionals, social workers, teachers, pediatricians, psychologists. Many had witnessed Kelly and Patricia's behavior over the years. Matthew had never asked them to get involved in his personal life, but now, with the custody of his son at stake, he reached out. The response was overwhelming. 8 professionals, including Owen's teacher Johanna Tuttle, his pediatrician, a child psychologist who'd worked with Owen after the highway incident, and several social workers who'd had dealings with Patricia through other cases, submitted affidavits supporting Matthew's custody claim. One affidavit, from a social worker named Denny Johnson, was particularly illuminating. She'd worked with a family where Patricia had been the grandmother 5 years earlier. Patricia had interfered in that custody case too, alienating the child from one parent. The case had ended with Patricia being barred from contact. Patricia James has a pattern of inappropriate interference in family situations, Denny wrote. She views herself as the ultimate authority on child rearing and shows no respect for parents' autonomy or modern understanding of child psychology. In the previous case, she was found to have emotionally harmed a child through her punitive methods and alienation tactics. Matthew added this to the file. The pattern of behavior strengthened his case exponentially. The night before the hearing, Matthew sat with Owen, reading bedtime stories. His son had slowly begun to relax, the nightmares lessening as he felt safer. But Owen was still worried. Tomorrow is court day, Owen said quietly. Well, I have to go. No, buddy. You don't have to be there. I'll go, and I'll make sure you're protected. What if the judge makes me go back to Mom and Grandma Patricia? Matthew set down the book and pulled Owen close. That's not going to happen. I promise you, Owen. I have shown the judge everything that happened. He understands. You're safe with me. Forever. Forever. Owen relaxed against him. Dad, are you sad about Mom? Matthew considered the question. Was he sad? There was grief, yes, for the marriage he'd thought he had, for the family unit Owen deserved. But sadness for Kelly herself? For the woman who'd endangered their child for a new relationship? I'm sad things turned out this way, Matthew said carefully. But I'm not sad about protecting you. That's the most important thing. I heard Grandma Patricia tell Mom that you were weak, that you always were. Owen looked up at his father. But you're not weak. You're strong. You came and got me. Matthew's throat tightened. You're strong too, Owen. You walked 3 miles to get home. You kept yourself safe. That took incredible courage. I was scared. Being scared and doing it anyway. That's what courage means. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Owen spoke again. Dad, will I ever have to see Grandma Patricia again? Not unless you want to, and not unless I'm there with you. I don't want to. She's mean. She said mean things about you. She said you were going to give me away. I would never. I know. But she said a lot. Mom said it too. They said you were going to send me away because I was too much work. Owen's voice got very small. Am I too much work? Matthew cupped his son's face in his hands. Owen, listen to me. You're not too much work. You're not too much of anything. You are exactly right. You are my son, and I love you more than anything in this world. What your mother and grandmother said was a lie. It was wrong, and I will spend every day proving to you that it was a lie. Owen hugged him tightly, and Matthew held on, feeling the weight of his son's trust. This was what he was fighting for. Not revenge, not vindication, protection. The absolute assurance that Owen would never again doubt his father's love. The custody hearing began at 9 a.m. in family court. Judge Ronald Stanley presided, a man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness and low tolerance for parental alienation. Matthew had appeared in his court before as an expert witness. The judge recognized him. "Mr. Cameron, under different circumstances, I'd have you at the witness stand providing expert testimony. Today, you're the plaintiff. That must feel unusual." "Yes, Your Honor," Matthew said, "but it's clarified my understanding of what my clients go through." Kelly sat across the courtroom with her lawyer, Sean Loomis, an attorney known for aggressive defense of mothers in custody cases. Patricia sat behind them, her expression haughty and unyielding. Lawrence wasn't present. Arnold had successfully argued he had no standing in the case, but his presence was felt. Arnold Holt presented Matthew's case methodically. The timeline of events the night Owen walked on the highway. The text messages showing coordination between Kelly and Patricia. The medical reports detailing Owen's injuries and psychological state. The school records documenting Owen's fear. The custody evaluation from Dr. Reed. Then came the affidavits from the 8 professionals, each one adding weight to the picture of systematic emotional abuse and neglect. Kelly's lawyer fought back hard, but his strategy became clear quickly. Minimize, justify, attack Matthew. "Mr. Loomis," Judge Stanley interrupted during the opening statement, "are you arguing that leaving a 6-year-old locked in a room in the dark, knowing he'd run away, then failing to call the police or pick him up while he walked barefoot on a highway, constitutes reasonable parenting?" "Your Honor, I'm arguing that one mistake in judgment during a period of personal stress for Mrs. Cameron shouldn't result in her losing custody of her child." One mistake. Judge Stanley held up the thick file. "I'm looking at months of documented parental alienation, systematic attempts to damage the child's relationship with his father, and negligence that could have resulted in the child's death. That's not one mistake. Mrs. Cameron is willing to attend parenting classes, undergo therapy. That's expected at a minimum," the judge said dryly. "Continue." Sean Loomis called Patricia James to the stand. It was a strategic error, and Matthew saw Arnold barely suppress a smile. Patricia presented herself as a concerned grandmother, traditional but loving. She spoke about Kelly's stress, about Matthew's long work hours, about Owen being a difficult child who needed structure. Then Arnold cross-examined her. "Mrs. James, you locked Owen in a guest room. How long? An hour, perhaps, until he calmed down. And this was dark room. I turned off the lights. He needed to learn consequences. Owen is 6 years old. He's afraid of the dark. His teacher confirmed this. His therapist confirmed this. You knew this, correct?" Patricia's jaw tightened. Children need to overcome their fears by being locked in what terrifies them. It's called discipline, Mr. Holt. Something this generation knows nothing about. "I see. And when Owen ran away from your house, you called your daughter, but not the police." "What?" "Kelly is his mother. She was handling it." "How was she handling it?" "She told me Owen was being manipulative, that he'd come back when he got tired." "Did it occur to you that a 6-year-old child, at night, barefoot, alone, might be in danger?" Patricia's expression turned cold. "He's Matthew's son. He probably knew exactly what he was doing, causing drama to get attention." "You believe a 6-year-old child orchestrated walking on a highway as a manipulation tactic?" "I believe children learn manipulation from their parents. Matthew has always been overly dramatic." Arnold entered into evidence the affidavit from Denny Johnson, the social worker who dealt with Patricia in a previous case. Patricia's face went pale as Arnold read aloud the documented pattern of her interference and emotional harm to children. "Mrs. James, you were found by a court 5 years ago to have engaged in parental alienation in another family. Is that correct?" "That was a misunderstanding." "Yes or no, Mrs. James?" The court was biased. "I'll take that as a yes." "And now, with your own grandson, you engage in the same behavior. You coordinated with your daughter to alienate Owen from his father. The text messages show this clearly." What made you believe you had the right to interfere in your grandson's relationship with his father? Patricia drew herself up. Matthew is weak. He's always been weak. He coddles the boy, makes him soft. Owen needs firm guidance, proper masculine authority. Not a father who sits around talking about feelings all day. Proper masculine authority? Like the kind that left Owen walking barefoot on a highway with cuts and splinters in his feet. That was an accident. No, Mrs. James. That was neglect. That was the result of your belief that you know better than trained professionals, better than medical experts, better than anyone else how to raise a child. And your arrogance nearly got Owen killed. Arnold, let that hang in the air before continuing. You have grandchildren rights in this state, Mrs. James. You could have petitioned for visitation through legal means. Instead, you chose to work with your daughter to alienate Owen from his father, so you could have more control. That's not love. That's ego. Patricia's mask finally shattered. How dare you? I've raised successful children. I know what I'm doing. Matthew has poisoned Owen against his own mother, and you're helping him. This entire proceeding is a farce. That boy needs discipline, not coddling. He needs to learn respect, not be told his feelings matter. And yes, I locked him in a room because he was throwing a tantrum. Children need to learn self-control. If he ran away, that shows he's manipulative and needs even firmer boundaries. The courtroom went silent. Even Sean Loomis looked horrified. Judge Stanley spoke quietly. Mrs. James, you've just admitted to child abuse and demonstrated that you have no remorse for it. Step down. Patricia looked shocked, as if she couldn't understand why her words had landed badly. She opened her mouth to argue, but Sean Loomis frantically gestured for her to stop. The damage was done. Kelly took the stand next, and her testimony was more practiced. She admitted mistakes, claimed stress, expressed remorse. She talked about how much she loved Owen, how she'd been influenced by her mother's old-fashioned views, how she was willing to do whatever it took to be a better parent. It was a good performance. Matthew could see the judge considering it. Then Arnold showed the text messages again, specifically the one where Kelly had written about Lawrence wanting to adopt Owen and them starting fresh with new babies. Mrs. Cameron, you texted your mother that Owen was in the way. Can you explain what you meant? Kelly's composure cracked. That's taken out of context. The context is clear. You were planning a new life with Lawrence Cannon. Owen didn't fit that plan. So you and your mother developed a strategy to alienate Owen from his father and establish Matthew as unfit, correct? We were just venting, make him look unstable. Document everything. My lawyer says the courts favor mothers. Those are your mother's words. Your response was, Matthew's too observant. I need to be careful. That's not venting, Mrs. Cameron. That's conspiracy. Kelly's eyes filled with tears. I love my son. I made mistakes, but I love him. Do you? Arnold's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Mrs. Cameron, when you received the text from your mother that Owen had run away, what did you do? I told her he'd come back. You didn't call the police. You didn't call your husband. You didn't leave your lover's arms to go look for your child. Instead, you hid in a garage while your 6-year-old son walked barefoot on a highway in the dark. If you loved Owen, if you truly loved him, what would you have done? Kelly couldn't answer. The tears weren't calculated now. They were real, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. I submit to the court, Arnold said, that Mrs. Cameron loves the idea of being a mother more than she loves the actual work of mothering. She loves the social status, the narrative, the identity. But when Owen needed her most, when he was lost and scared and in danger, she chose her lover over her child. That's not love. That's narcissism. The final witness was Dr. Jeffrey Reed, whose testimony was clinical and damning. He walked the judge through Owen's psychological state, the signs of trauma, the way the child had been systematically taught to doubt his father's love. In my professional opinion, Jeffrey concluded, Owen Cameron has been subjected to severe emotional abuse through parental alienation. He requires significant therapy and a stable, consistent environment to recover. Mrs. Cameron and Mrs. James have demonstrated no understanding of the harm they've caused and no genuine remorse. Until they complete extensive therapy and demonstrate changed behavior, they pose a psychological risk to Owen's well-being. Judge Stanley called for a recess. 2 hours later, he returned with his ruling. "I've been a family court judge for 23 years, he began. I've seen terrible things. Parents who use their children as weapons. Grandparents who interfere in ways that harm rather than help. But this case is particularly egregious because Mrs. Cameron and Mrs. James genuinely believe they did nothing wrong." He looked at Kelly. "Mrs. Cameron, you endangered your child's life. Not through a moment of inattention, but through a calculated series of choices prioritizing your romantic relationship over your son's safety. Your text messages reveal a plan to alienate Owen from his father. Not because Mr. Cameron was unfit, but because it served your purposes." Then to Patricia. "Mrs. James, you have a documented history of interfering in families and causing harm to children through your rigid, outdated beliefs. Your testimony today showed no growth, no understanding, no empathy. You locked a terrified child in a dark room as punishment and felt justified in doing so." The judge outlined his ruling. Matthew would receive full legal and physical custody of Owen. Kelly would receive supervised visitation twice a month, pending completion of a year-long parenting program and individual therapy focusing on narcissistic tendencies. Patricia James would have no contact with Owen, supervised or otherwise, for a minimum of 2 years, at which point the issue could be revisited if she completed family therapy and could demonstrate changed behavior. "This court's primary concern is the best interest of the child," Judge Stanley finished. "Owen Cameron has suffered enough. He deserves a childhood free from manipulation and emotional abuse. Mr. Cameron, you have full custody. Use it wisely." Matthew felt the weight of months lift from his shoulders. It was over. Owen was safe. Kelly broke down sobbing. Patricia stood up, fury radiating from her. "This is outrageous. You can't. I can and I have, Mrs. James. If you continue, I'll hold you in contempt. I suggest you leave my courtroom." Patricia stormed out. Kelly was led away by her lawyer, still crying. Matthew watched them go, feeling no triumph, only exhaustion and relief. Arnold clapped him on the shoulder. "You did it. Your son is safe." "We did it," Matthew corrected. "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, Matthew called his mother. "It's over, Mom. I have custody." Irma Cameron's sob of relief echoed through the phone. "Thank God. Bring Owen over for dinner tonight. We'll celebrate." "We will." Matthew stood in the spring sunshine, feeling the warmth on his face. There was still work ahead. Owen's therapy, his own processing of the betrayal, the practical realities of single parenthood. But the war was won. His son was safe. That evening, Matthew picked Owen up from his mother's house where he'd been staying during the hearing. Owen ran to him, and Matthew scooped him up. "Did you win?" Owen asked. "We won," Matthew said. "You're staying with me. No more visits with Mom unless I'm there. No more Grandma Patricia." Owen's whole body relaxed. "Really? Forever? Really? Forever." They drove to Grandma Irma's house, where she prepared Owen's favorite dinner. The evening was filled with laughter and relief, with Owen slowly beginning to believe he was truly safe. Later, tucking Owen into bed in what was now permanently his room, Matthew reflected on the journey. He'd used his professional knowledge, his network, his understanding of the system to protect his son. He documented everything, stayed calm, and let Kelly and Patricia reveal themselves. Some would call it manipulation. Matthew called it protection. "Dad!" Owen's sleepy voice interrupted his thoughts. "You know what?" "What, buddy?" "Grandma Patricia was wrong. You're not weak at all. You're the strongest person I know." Matthew kissed his son's forehead. "Sleep well, Owen. You're safe." "I know." As Matthew left the room, he heard Owen's breathing even out into sleep. No nightmares tonight. Just peace. The revenge wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was systematic, documented, legal. Matthew had used the system that existed to protect children and wielded it perfectly. Kelly and Patricia had destroyed themselves through their own actions and words. Matthew had simply ensured those actions and words were seen clearly by the people with power to act. In the end, the best revenge wasn't hurting them. It was ensuring they could never hurt Owen again. And that was something Matthew could live with. 3 months after the custody hearing, Matthew sat in his office with a new client, a father whose ex-wife was engaging in parental alienation. Matthew listened to the familiar story with new understanding, new empathy. "I feel helpless," the client said. "Like I'm watching my daughter slip away, and there's nothing I can do." "There's always something you can do," Matthew said. "But you have to be smart about it. Document everything. Build your case. Let them reveal themselves. What if it's not enough?" Matthew thought of Owen, who is thriving now, in therapy, making progress, laughing again. He thought of the justice they'd found, the safety they'd secured. "It will be enough," Matthew said, "because you're fighting for your child, and that makes you stronger than you know." The client left with a plan, with hope. Matthew added his notes to the file and checked his watch. Almost time to pick up Owen from school. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Kelly's lawyer reached out. She wants to discuss modifying the custody arrangement. Apparently, Lawrence Cannon broke up with her when he realized the publicity would hurt his business reputation. "She's asking for your help." Matthew stared at the message. Kelly wanted help now, after everything. Part of him, the part that had loved her once, felt a flicker of sympathy. But the larger part, the father who'd watched his son wake up screaming, who'd documented the bruises and the fear, felt nothing but cold resolve. He typed back, "Tell her I'll agree to discuss modifications after she completes the full year of therapy and parenting classes. And only if Dr. Reed evaluates her progress and signs off. If she tries to circumvent the court order in any way, I'll file for complete termination of her parental rights." Arnold's response came quickly. "Understood. You're playing this exactly right." Matthew put his phone away and headed out to his car. He had a son to pick up, homework to help with, a life to build. That was his victory. Not Kelly's downfall, but Owen's recovery. Not revenge, but restoration. He'd used his knowledge, his skills, and the system itself to protect what mattered most. And every time Owen smiled without fear, every time he slept without nightmares, every time he said, "I love you, Dad," without the shadow of doubt, that was Matthew's triumph. The story spread through his professional network, a cautionary tale and a blueprint. How a therapist had used his expertise to protect his child. How documentation and patience had won against manipulation and cruelty. How the system, when properly leveraged, could work. Matthew became known for helping fathers in high-conflict custody battles. His practice grew, his reputation solidified. But he never forgot those dark hours when Owen was missing, when the police stood on his doorstep, when he'd read those cruel text messages. He'd been tested and had passed. He'd been forced to fight and had won. Not through violence or illegal means, but through intelligence, preparation, and unwavering determination to protect his child. 6 months later, Matthew and Owen stood in the same courthouse, this time for a different reason. Matthew was legally changing his surname back to his mother's maiden name, Ellison, and Owen was becoming Owen Ellison, shedding the last connection to the family that had tried to harm him. "New start," Matthew told his son as they walked out with the new papers. "New start." Owen agreed, holding his father's hand tightly. They drove to the park, where Grandma Irma was waiting with ice cream and celebration. As Owen ran ahead, laughing, Matthew watched and finally allowed himself to feel it. Not triumph over Kelly and Patricia's downfall, but simply joy in his son's healing. That was the real victory. That was what made everything worth it. Owen was safe, loved, and learning to trust again. And Matthew Cameron Ellison, the therapist who'd fought for his child using every tool at his disposal, could finally rest knowing he'd done what he'd promised. Protected his son, no matter what it took. The end of this chapter was really the beginning of their new life. One built on truth, safety, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. Justice had been served, not through revenge, but through the simple, powerful act of a parent refusing to let his child be harmed. And that, Matthew thought as he watched Owen laugh in the sunshine, was the best kind of victory there was. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.